"Security, remove this woman immediately," screamed the billionaire mother-in-law as she pointed at Jasmine with disgust. But when the head of security whispered something in her ear, the color drained from the wealthy woman's face. What he told her would destroy their family empire forever. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about a woman who never knew her true power until the world tried to strip away her dignity. Jasmine Carter had always been the type of person who believed in working twice as hard to get half as far. At 32, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her natural hair pulled back in a professional bun, her clothes modest but well-tailored. She worked as what everyone called a junior analyst at Preston and Associates, one of the most prestigious financial firms in the city. What nobody knew was that Jasmine's analytical mind could outperform most senior executives, but she'd learned long ago not to shine too brightly in rooms where she was already seen as an outsider. Every morning, Jasmine would arrive at the sleek downtown office building, badge in, and settle into her cramped cubicle while her colleagues, mostly white men from Ivy League schools, occupied the corner offices with floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd watch them stride past her desk without acknowledgement, their conversations flowing freely about weekend yacht trips and private club memberships, a world she'd never been invited to enter despite being married into wealth. Because Jasmine Carter wasn't just any junior analyst, she was Mrs. Michael Wellington, wife to the heir of one of America's most powerful families. The Wellington dynasty had built their fortune through real estate, oil, and strategic investments spanning 3 generations. But if you looked at Jasmine's daily life, you'd never guess she had any connection to such privilege. She took the subway to work, packed her lunch in a brown bag, and lived in a modest apartment that Michael claimed was temporary while they figured out their future. The truth was, Michael's family had made it crystal clear that Jasmine wasn't their future. His mother, Catherine Wellington, was a woman who commanded boardrooms and charity galas with equal authority, her silver hair always perfectly styled, her designer suits tailored to perfection. She had the kind of presence that made people step aside when she entered a room, and she wielded her influence like a sword. From the moment Michael introduced Jasmine 3 years ago, Catherine had looked at her the way one might examine a stain on expensive fabric, something that needed to be removed as quickly and quietly as possible. Richard Wellington, Michael's father, was equally disapproving but more subtle in his disdain. He would ask Jasmine questions about her people and her background, with the practiced politeness of someone who'd learned to mask his prejudices behind good breeding. Together, the Wellingtons represented old money, old power, and old attitudes that saw Jasmine as nothing more than a gold digger who'd somehow managed to ensnare their precious son. But Jasmine had fallen in love with Michael during their college years, before she even knew about his family's wealth. She'd been drawn to his easy laugh, his apparent indifference to material things, and what she thought was his genuine character. They'd studied together in the library, shared cheap pizza dinners, and dreamed about changing the world through socially conscious business practices. Michael had seemed different from the privileged elite she'd encountered, more grounded, more real. Those dreams felt like a lifetime ago now. As months passed, Jasmine began to notice changes in Michael. He stayed late at the office more frequently, his phone was always face down during dinner, and their conversations had become stilted, polite exchanges about weather and work schedules. When she tried to bring up their future, their plans to start a family, or even just planning a vacation together, Michael would deflect with vague promises about after this next quarter or once things settle down. At Preston and Associates, Jasmine threw herself into her work with quiet determination. She was brilliant at pattern recognition, could spot financial irregularities that others missed, and had an intuitive understanding of market psychology that impressed even her most skeptical colleagues, though they'd never admit it publicly. Her reports were always thorough, her analysis always spot on, but somehow the credit always seemed to flow upward to her male supervisors. "Jasmine, could you grab coffee for the morning meeting?" her boss, Mr. Harrison, would ask, even though she held an MBA from Northwestern and had been with the company for 2 years. "And make sure to get those croissants from the place on 5th Street. The clients loved those. She'd smile politely and comply, just as she'd learned to smile when her colleagues made comments about diversity initiatives and affirmative action hires within her earshot. She'd perfected the art of making herself small, of not taking up too much space, of being grateful for opportunities that she was more than qualified for. But even as she endured the daily microaggressions and casual dismissals, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening around her. She'd noticed patterns in the company's financial flows, relationships between accounts that didn't quite make sense, and a level of deference from senior staff that seemed oddly disproportionate for a mid-tier financial firm. When she'd tried to ask questions about the company's ownership structure or founding history, she'd been told that such information was above her pay grade and that she should focus on her assigned tasks. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in November. Jasmine had been working late again, analyzing quarterly reports for a client presentation, when she decided to stop by Michael's office to surprise him with dinner from their favorite Thai restaurant. The Wellington family owned a significant stake in several downtown properties, and Michael worked from a corner office in one of their premier buildings. She'd expected to find him buried in spreadsheets or on a conference call. Instead, she found his office empty, his computer locked, and his personal items hastily cleared from his desk. The security guard downstairs told her that Mr. Wellington had left hours ago with a woman, a tall blonde in an expensive red dress who'd been waiting for him in the lobby. That night, Jasmine sat in their apartment staring at Michael's phone, which he'd carelessly left on the kitchen counter. She'd never been the type to snoop, but something in her gut told her that her marriage was already over. She just didn't know it yet. When the phone buzzed with a text message, she couldn't help but see the preview on the screen. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night. The hotel room is perfect. Love you too." The message was from someone named Isabella, and it wasn't the first one in the thread. When Michael came home 3 hours later, smelling like expensive perfume and making excuses about client meetings, Jasmine confronted him with quiet dignity. She didn't yell or throw things. She simply placed his phone on the coffee table, looked him in the eye, and asked, "How long has this been going on?" Michael's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, defiance, and finally something that looked almost like relief. "Jasmine, I can explain," he started, but they both knew there was nothing to explain. The marriage had been dying slowly for months, strangled by his family's disapproval and his own weakness in standing up to them. "Does your mother know?" Jasmine asked, though she already suspected the answer. Michael's silence was confirmation enough. Catherine Wellington had probably orchestrated the whole thing, finding a more suitable partner for her son, someone who would fit seamlessly into their world of country clubs and charity boards. The next few weeks passed in a blur of awkward conversations and careful politeness as they worked out the details of their separation. Michael moved out of their apartment and back into the family estate, while Jasmine remained in their modest rental, trying to figure out how to rebuild her life. She thought the worst was behind her. She was wrong. The ambush came on a cold December morning when Catherine Wellington swept into the offices of Preston and Associates like an avenging angel in a $12,000 coat. She arrived with her personal attorney, 2 security guards, and a folder full of documents that she slammed onto the reception desk with theatrical flair. "I'm here to see the criminal you have working in your analyst department," Catherine announced loud enough for half the office to hear. "The woman who has been stealing confidential information from my family's companies and selling it to our competitors." Jasmine looked up from her desk in shock as every head in the office turned toward her. Mr. Harrison emerged from his office, his face flushed with confusion and alarm. "Mrs. Wellington, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Catherine cut him off, "is thinking that this person could be trusted with sensitive financial information. We have evidence that she's been using her position here to conduct corporate espionage against Wellington Holdings and our subsidiary companies." The accusations were absurd, but they were delivered with such authority and backed by such obvious wealth and power that people began to believe them immediately. Jasmine watched in horror as her colleagues stepped away from her, their expressions shifting from confusion to suspicion to outright condemnation. That's not true, Jasmine said, standing up from her desk. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I've never had access to Wellington Holdings' confidential information, and I would never— Security, remove this woman immediately, Catherine screamed, pointing at Jasmine with perfectly manicured nails. She's a threat to this company and everyone in it. The security guards moved forward, but something unexpected happened. The head of security, a distinguished black man in his 50s, held up his hand to stop them. He walked calmly to Catherine Wellington, leaned down, and whispered something in her ear. Whatever he said made the color drain from Catherine's face so completely that her expensive foundation couldn't hide her pallor. That's impossible, Catherine whispered, but her voice had lost all its authority. The security chief straightened up and looked directly at Jasmine. Ma'am, he said with obvious respect, I think there's something you need to know. But before anyone could explain what was happening, Mr. Harrison had already made his decision. Faced with the choice between supporting his employee and appeasing a powerful client, he chose the path of least resistance. Jasmine, I'm sorry, but given these serious allegations, I have to ask you to clear out your desk immediately. Your employment here is terminated effective now. The next hour was a nightmare of whispered conversations and pointed stares as Jasmine packed her few personal belongings into a cardboard box. Her keycard was deactivated, her computer access revoked, and her colleagues treated her like she was radioactive. By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the building that the diversity hire had been exposed as a corporate spy. Michael, when she finally reached him by phone, was worse than useless. Jasmine, I'm sorry this happened, but you have to understand. My mother is protecting the family business. Maybe it's better this way. We can make a clean break. A clean break. As if their 3-year marriage and her destroyed reputation were just accounting errors to be written off. That evening, Jasmine sat in her sister Denise's guest bedroom, staring at the cardboard box that contained the remnants of her professional life. Denise had taken her in without question, offering fierce solidarity and homemade soup, but Jasmine felt like she was drowning in shame and confusion. Her bank accounts had been frozen pending investigation into the false allegations, her professional references were now worthless, and her marriage was officially over. The local business news picked up the story within days, running a gleeful expose about the gold digger who'd been caught trying to steal from her wealthy in-laws. The articles never mentioned her MBA, her analytical skills, or her spotless professional record. Instead, they painted her as a calculating opportunist who'd married for money and turned to corporate espionage when the marriage failed. But here's what nobody expected about Jasmine Carter. She didn't break. Even as her world crumbled around her, she continued to show the same grace and kindness that had always defined her character. When her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, struggled with her groceries, Jasmine helped carry them upstairs. When the local homeless shelter needed volunteers for their holiday meal program, Jasmine spent her days ladling soup and organizing donations. When struggling teenagers in her neighborhood needed help with financial literacy, she tutored them for free in the public library. People noticed. The security guard from her old building who'd seen her kindness to everyone from janitors to executives. The cashier at the corner store who watched Jasmine pay for a stranger's groceries when their card was declined. The children she tutored, who told their parents about the nice lady who made math make sense and never talked down to them. Word spread quietly through the community about this woman who'd been publicly humiliated but responded with dignity and service. It created a network of people who knew the truth about her character, even as the business world continued to shun her. 2 months after the incident at Preston and Associates, Jasmine received a phone call that changed everything. The caller was Patricia Blackwood, one of the most respected attorneys in the city, known for handling high-stakes corporate law and estate planning for the ultra-wealthy. Miss Carter, Patricia said in her crisp, professional voice, we need to discuss your inheritance. Jasmine almost hung up, assuming it was some kind of scam. I think you have the wrong person. I don't have any wealthy relatives. Your grandmother was Evelyn Carter, Patricia continued patiently. She passed away 6 months ago, and her will specifically names you as her primary beneficiary. Jasmine's breath caught. She had memories of her grandmother from childhood, a dignified woman who'd visited occasionally, bringing books and asking probing questions about Jasmine's school performance and future goals. But Evelyn had been estranged from Jasmine's mother over some family disagreement, and contact had dwindled to nothing by the time Jasmine reached high school. My grandmother wasn't wealthy, Jasmine protested. She lived simply and we hardly knew each other. Miss Carter, Patricia said gently, I think you'd better come to my office. There's quite a lot to discuss. The meeting that followed was surreal. Patricia's office occupied an entire floor of a downtown skyscraper with views that stretched to the horizon and furniture that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Patricia herself was an imposing woman in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. Your grandmother, Evelyn Carter, was one of the most brilliant business minds of her generation, Patricia began, spreading documents across a conference table that could seat 20 people. She built a financial empire over 40 years, but she was intensely private about it. She operated under various corporate names and holding companies, and very few people knew the true extent of her wealth. Jasmine stared at the documents, corporate filings, bank statements, property deeds, and investment portfolios that represented numbers she couldn't even comprehend. This can't be right. Why didn't anyone ever tell me? Because she didn't want you to know, at least not yet, Patricia explained. Evelyn believed that wealth without character was dangerous, and she wanted to be sure you developed your own integrity and work ethic before inheriting hers. She'd been watching you for years, monitoring your career, your marriage, your choices. Watching me how? Patricia smiled, and for the first time there was warmth in her expression. Miss Carter, what do you know about the ownership structure of Preston and Associates? The question seemed random, but something cold began to form in Jasmine's stomach. It's privately held. The ownership information isn't public. That's correct. Preston and Associates is wholly owned by Carter Holdings, which is wholly owned by the Evelyn Carter Trust, which now belongs entirely to you. Patricia paused to let this sink in. Ms. Carter, you've been working at your own company for 2 years. The room seemed to spin around Jasmine as the implications hit her. Every slight, every dismissive comment, every condescending task she'd been assigned, it had all happened at a company that was legally hers. The junior analyst position had been a test, orchestrated by a grandmother who wanted to see how her granddaughter would handle adversity and professional challenges. She knew, Jasmine whispered. She knew what they were doing to me. She knew everything, Patricia confirmed. She received detailed reports about your work performance, your treatment by colleagues, your grace under pressure. She was particularly impressed by your analytical work and your character when facing discrimination. Then why didn't she stop it? Why did she let me suffer? Patricia's expression grew sad but understanding. Because she wanted you to discover your own strength first. She believed that inheriting great wealth without understanding hardship would corrupt you, as it had corrupted so many others. She wanted you to know what it felt like to work for everything you had. The inheritance was staggering. Jasmine now owned Preston and Associates outright, along with dozens of other companies, real estate holdings across 3 states, and investment portfolios worth over $2 billion. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. There's one more thing, Patricia said, pulling out a final folder. Wellington Holdings has been borrowing heavily from Carter Holdings for the past 5 years. They currently owe approximately $500 million, with balloon payments due within the next 6 months. Jasmine stared at the loan documents, recognizing Michael's father's signature on multiple pages. The Wellington family empire, which had always seemed so unassailable, was essentially being propped up by her grandmother's money. Without those loans, Wellington Holdings would collapse within months. They don't know, do they? Jasmine asked. They have no idea that Carter Holdings is connected to you. As far as they know, they've been borrowing from an anonymous investment fund. Patricia's smile was sharp now, like a blade. Miss Carter, you literally hold the financial future of the family that tried to destroy you. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings, corporate restructuring, and strategic planning. Jasmine worked with Patricia and a team of advisors to understand her new position and responsibilities. She learned about the dozens of companies she now owned, the thousands of employees who worked for her, and the enormous influence she wielded in multiple industries. But she also learned about her grandmother's final wishes. Evelyn Carter had left detailed instructions about her hopes for the inheritance, that it would be used not just to accumulate more wealth, but to create opportunities for others, particularly those who faced the same kinds of discrimination that Jasmine had experienced. The plan they developed was elegant in its justice and devastating in its precision. On a cold February morning, exactly 3 months after Catherine Wellington had humiliated her in front of her colleagues, Jasmine walked back into the offices of Preston and Associates. But this time she entered through the executive elevator, accompanied by Patricia and the company's senior management team. Mr. Harrison was in his office when his secretary buzzed him with obvious confusion. "Sir, the new owner is here to meet with you." "What new owner?" Harrison asked, but his question was answered when Jasmine appeared in his doorway, no longer dressed like a junior analyst but wearing a perfectly tailored suit that spoke of serious money and serious power. "Hello, Mr. Harrison," Jasmine said calmly. "I think we need to have a conversation about workplace discrimination and hostile work environments." The color drained from Harrison's face as Patricia stepped into view behind Jasmine, her briefcase full of documented evidence about every slight, every passed-over promotion, every demeaning task that had been assigned based on race rather than capability. But the real confrontation was still to come. Catherine Wellington arrived at Preston and Associates 2 hours later, summoned by a phone call that informed her that the firm wanted to discuss the allegations she'd made about their former employee. Catherine swept into the building with her usual imperious confidence, expecting to be treated like the royalty she believed herself to be. Instead, she was escorted to the main conference room where she found Jasmine sitting at the head of a polished table, surrounded by lawyers and executives. Catherine's face went through several expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally a kind of horrified understanding. "You," she whispered. "Me," Jasmine confirmed. "Mrs. Wellington, I believe you publicly accused me of corporate espionage and theft. You had me fired from my job and my reputation destroyed. You froze my bank accounts and had me investigated by private detectives." Catherine's lawyer, who had accompanied her, looked increasingly uncomfortable as Patricia laid out document after document, proving not only Jasmine's innocence but her actual ownership of the company Catherine claimed she had wronged. "This is impossible," Catherine said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "What's impossible," Jasmine replied, "is that a woman who built her fortune on inherited money and social connections believes she could destroy someone based purely on prejudice and get away with it." The final blow came when Patricia presented the loan documents. Catherine Wellington's face went ashen as she realized that her family's entire financial structure depended on the goodwill of the woman she'd tried to ruin. "You're going to destroy us," Catherine whispered. Jasmine considered this for a long moment. She had the power to do exactly that, to call in the loans, to bankrupt the Wellington family, to reduce them to the kind of financial desperation she'd faced just months before. It would be perfect justice, complete revenge for years of discrimination and humiliation. Instead, she chose something more powerful than revenge. She chose grace. "No," Jasmine said quietly, "I'm not going to destroy you. But I am going to restructure your loans with some very specific conditions." The conditions were designed to create lasting change rather than momentary satisfaction. Wellington Holdings would continue operating, but with new oversight requirements, mandatory diversity training for all executives, and a commitment to supporting minority-owned businesses. A significant portion of their profits would fund a scholarship program for underprivileged students pursuing business degrees. Catherine would also issue a public apology, admitting that her accusations against Jasmine had been false and motivated by personal prejudice rather than evidence. "Why?" Catherine asked, her voice barely audible. "Why not destroy us when you have the power to do it?" Jasmine stood up from her chair, and for the first time in their relationship, Catherine Wellington had to look up at her. Because, Mrs. Wellington, true power isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building a world where the next young woman who looks like me doesn't have to face what I faced. In the months that followed, Jasmine transformed not just Preston and Associates, but the entire business landscape around her. She used her wealth and influence to create mentorship programs, to fund minority-owned startups, and to challenge discriminatory practices in hiring and promotion across multiple industries. The woman who had once packed her lunch in brown bags and took the subway to work now controlled a business empire worth billions. But she never forgot what it felt like to be underestimated, dismissed, and humiliated. Every decision she made was informed by that experience. Every opportunity she created was designed to prevent others from facing the same injustices. Michael tried to reconcile, of course, showing up at her new penthouse office with flowers and apologies. But Jasmine had moved far beyond the woman who had once loved him, and she had no interest in revisiting a relationship built on his family's conditional approval. "You had your chance to stand up for what was right," she told him calmly. "Instead, you chose comfort over character. I can't build a life with someone who doesn't have the courage to defend the people he claims to love." The story of Jasmine Carter became legend in business circles. The junior analyst who turned out to own the company, the woman who faced down billionaire bullies with dignity and grace, the granddaughter who inherited not just wealth, but the wisdom to use it responsibly. But perhaps the most powerful part of her story wasn't the dramatic reversal of fortune or the public vindication of her character. It was what happened in the quiet moments afterward, when young professionals who looked like her would approach her at industry events, their eyes bright with possibility, knowing that someone who understood their struggles had succeeded not by abandoning her principles, but by holding fast to them. Never underestimate the quiet strength of those you dismiss. The woman you mock today might hold your future in her hands tomorrow. Respect isn't earned by wealth or status. It's given through character and kindness. And sometimes the person serving you with grace is actually the one in charge all along. In the end, Jasmine Carter didn't just inherit a fortune. She inherited the responsibility to use power with wisdom, to lead with compassion, and to ensure that her success became a ladder for others to climb rather than a wall to keep them out. That's the kind of legacy that changes the world, one act of grace at a time.